Herzlich willkommen zu Folge 130 des N-Power Podcasts. Heute, wenn ihr das hört, ist nach dem 23. Februar 2025. Das bedeutet, heute ist nach der Bundestagswahl. Und was jetzt ansteht, sind Koalitionsverhandlungen. Und ein großes Thema, was uns in Deutschland umtreibt, ist auch dieses ganze Thema natürlich der Infrastruktur, der Ausgaben und was für Möglichkeiten wir eigentlich haben, in unserem Land weiter eben auch Investitionen zu tätigen. Und das wird gehe ich davon aus, sehr zentraler Punkt auch in den ganzen Koalitionsverhandlungen werden. Und eins dieser Infrastrukturthemen, was dabei auch besonders von Interesse ist, ist natürlich Thema Energiewende und dabei auch ein Thema, und zwar die Infrastruktur für das Laden von elektrischen Fahrzeugen, also die Ladeinfrastruktur für Elektrofahrzeuge. Und genau darum soll es in der heutigen Folge gehen. Und das Ganze ist auch eine sehr spezielle Folge, weil es ist nicht ein ganz normaler Podcast, sondern zwei Dinge sind vielleicht ein bisschen speziell. Das eine ist, es ist die Live-Aufnahme der eWorld, auf der wir vor jetzt knapp 2 Wochen waren. Und es war ein ganz cooles Setting, da waren wir in so einem Glaskasten. Ihr konntet dann außen quasi drumherum sitzen und zuhören und ein paar von euch waren ja auch da, was uns super gefreut hat. Da auch nochmal vielen Dank, dass ihr dabei wart. Finden wir immer super schön, da den Austausch zu haben, weil das normalerweise ja doch ein bisschen eher so ein Sendeding ist, was wir hier haben und dann eben doch viele Sachen nicht mitbekommen. Und das Zweite, was speziell sein wird, der Podcast ist auf Englisch tatsächlich, weil wir mit einer Person gesprochen haben. Wir haben mit Chris Cardé von HecCharge gesprochen. Und Chris ist Native English Speaker, das heißt, er ist eben muttersprachlich Englisch. Er kann ein bisschen Deutsch, aber wir haben dann auf Englisch aufgenommen, weil das eben seine präferierte, bevorzugte Sprache ist. Wir wollten es einfach mal ausprobieren, mal gucken auch, wie das bei euch ankommt, ob ihr das cool findet, weil dann können wir natürlich auch nochmal in Zukunft sowas machen, aber da könnt ihr uns gerne mal auch rückmelden, was ihr davon haltet. Jetzt auf jeden Fall viel Spaß mit der Folge. Ich hoffe, ihr nehmt was mit und wir sind ganz gespannt, was jetzt auch in den nächsten Wochen und Monaten noch bei den Koalitionsverhandlungen passiert. Aber jetzt erstmal geht's los mit Chris Cardé von HeyCharge.
Oder auf Deutsch? Ich mach's auf Deutsch, ne?
Mach ganz kurz Deutsch, ja.
Genau, ihr Lieben, schön. Wir sind endlich auf der eWorld und wir sind tatsächlich live. Und das hat ein bisschen gedauert, weil ich heute tatsächlich aus Trondheim heute Morgen eingeflogen bin, durfte um 3:30 aufstehen und dann war der Flug aus Amsterdam zu spät und deswegen fangen wir ein bisschen später an. Deswegen schön, dass es trotzdem noch geklappt hat. Und Chris, ich werde dich gleich einleiten, aber genau, vielen Dank, dass du dir die Zeit genommen hast.
Und vielen Dank auch nochmal an die eWorld, dass sie es möglich gemacht haben, diese Stunde zu shiften. Ne? Das ist nicht selbstverständlich und hat uns das jetzt ermöglicht, dass wir hier zu dritt sitzen können. Ansonsten hätte ich das alleine machen müssen. Und deswegen umso schöner, dass wir es jetzt zu dritt machen können.
Super, genau. Willkommen bei N-Power machen wir das ja immer mit den Plopsen und deswegen fangen wir jetzt auch damit an. Deswegen 3, 2, 1. Yes.
Alright.
Genau. And with this, cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.
It's just Radler. So, but with this, welcome to the N-Power podcast today. This is going to be in English. I think it's one. Have we ever done an English one? I'm not sure. I think it's the first one that we actually do in English because our guest is, native English speaker. He speaks German. He lives in Munich, if I'm not mistaken. But his native language is English, and that's why we thought we're going to do this now. And we sit on eWorld in a little bit of how would you call this? A glass cubicle?
Yeah.
And there's people around us, and we can wave, and they wave back, which is amazing.
It's a little bit like a fish tank.
It looks a bit like a fish tank. Yeah, that's just how it is. Cool. We have Chris Cardé with us because we're going to talk about charging infrastructure in German, and the title of the episode is really wired for the future, charging infrastructure in Germany. And Chris is the CEO of a startup which is called HeyCharge, and what they are doing, they are in the charging business, if you will, and that's why we invited him to join us today for this episode. So in the next 45 minutes, let's see, it's going to be about charging infrastructure, but obviously Chris is also going to tell us a little bit about his company. So we know that right now in Germany, we have 83,955 charging points, at least according to Electromaps. And there's a goal by the government to actually have 1 million in place by 2030. So we have to go tenfold, if you will. And that is obviously needed because we want to have a lot of electric vehicles on the roads and they need to be charged. And there's a lot of people who live not in single houses, but they live in multi-story houses, and there needs to be solutions. And one of these solutions that we'll maybe have is by HeyCharge. And yeah, Chris is the CEO of HeyCharge, and Chris has been working at Google, and he's been in with HeyCharge in the what was the name of the accelerator? I wrote it down somewhere. Y Combinator. Yeah, and now he's working on how to make charging more accessible in multi-story buildings. But can you give us an idea, Chris? What is HeyCharge?
Yeah, well, HeyCharge, we originally started with really an idealistic mission to just deliver EV charging to people in apartment buildings. And it was also a little selfish because I brought my first electric car home to my apartment in Munich and said, oh, wow, the product space here is kind of a disaster. But more importantly, a lot of people are going to need this. And so we started off basically just trying to deliver a product to people in apartment buildings. We did that with what we thought was the right product. You know, it's why startups do MVPs. We did our MVP in a few months.
What is an MVP? For the ones
minimum viable product. So basically, that's, the kind of just a test to see, does the product you're building actually work? Will people buy it? And we built an MVP of the charging infrastructure based on today's technology. And we went off to a pilot in a building in Berlin, and it just didn't work. We ran into a brick wall, and that's when we kind of hit on what HeyCharge is today. The pilot didn't work because our test site in Berlin had an underground parking garage, and all the charging infrastructure you find today needs an internet connection, both from the charger to the cloud and from the user to the cloud. Well, the first thing that breaks down when you're in underground parking is that mobile network signal isn't there, the user's app doesn't work, and so we built a product that didn't work. So HeyCharge today delivers EV charging systems that are super resilient in that they don't need the internet connection. The app works with direct Bluetooth communication to the charger, and that not only makes it work underground, but it saves our customers up to 40% in OpEx and CapEx because it turns out that communications infrastructure is super expensive to install and maintain. So that's what HeyCharge does.
Yeah. Nice pitch. What is we've talked about that maybe before. CapEx, OpEx, just for the ones who've never heard these abbreviations.
Well, I'm much more of an engineer than a CFO, so I'm probably going to muddle my way through this, and people who know more than me will probably object. But long story short, OpEx is operational expenses. It's kind of ongoing cost of keeping something running, where CapEx is the capital investment. It's kind of the one-time upfront cost. And if you think I'm said that right, I'd be happy to have positive feedback.
Think it's good.
That's all right. That's all right.
All right. Normally, we always start with either/or questions to get a little bit more information about you. And I will start with one. Are you more early bird or a night owl?
Well, I have an 18-month-old child now, and that has substantially changed my approach to how the day works. I was definitely a night owl a couple of years ago, enjoying Munich nightlife.
But
now I'd say, the moment I can go to bed, I go to bed. And that means the body just naturally wakes up at 5 a.m. So my productive hours are now in the morning.
Okay, when we first met, I think 2 weeks ago, we saw you in the lab working. And for me, the question is, working in the lab or speaking at events like eWorld?
I mean, I'm an engineer, it's not just by choice, it's like deep in the bones, right? So I'm not happy if I can't be in the lab a little bit, but I think, the founder experience isn't just about sitting in a dark room, building cool stuff like a mad scientist. It's about getting it out there to the world. And so I'm not happy if I don't do a little bit of both, honestly. So I can't answer that as an either or question.
Okay,
It's got to be both, right?
That's all right.
But for us, it was quite surprising that you as a CEO of the company you worked in the lab. And
don't tell my investors that.
Yeah, I was like, maybe you should make such a big point out of that. No, I'm joking.
Yeah.
No, but I think technical authenticity and really staying hands-on with the nuts and bolts of the product and what it takes to build a product. I mean, at some point, you've got to let go. You've got to learn how to delegate. But if you lose all of your technical chops, it's kind of a problem.
Yeah. All right, next question. Fast charging or widespread access to standard charging?
Well, we kind of have a horse in this race in that our primary go-to-market, our primary product application is literally is widespread, slower, what we call AC charging. But our technology works actually to improve charging experiences, regardless of what kind of charger it is. But my personal belief is that what the kind of the world and policymakers and the media tend to miss is, they focus on the very visible, big, beautiful DC fast charging stations, the Tesla chargers, the Ionity.
300
now I need to
kilowatts.
throw favors out and name everybody, but I can't. But what folks tend to miss is the kind of the hidden thing, which is just large rows of AC chargers where people work, where people live, where they shop. And the EV drivers kind of know this intrinsically, that if you plug in every time you stop the car, you kind of don't worry about charging. And the only time you really need a DC fast charger is when you're going someplace far away. And I think that's really the missing piece, and it's been undercounted in terms of the importance, for subsidy programs, and just when people look at the state of EV charging, like what's happening. Like the media stories kind of show pictures of big DC fast charging, but that's only a part of it.
Yeah, and I think EV charging, AC/DC, we will talk about it later. One last question: public charging stations or private home charging?
That's actually almost the same thing, I guess.
Yeah, but I mean, in the public, it's also possible to have standard charging with only 12 kilowatt or so.
But I think my answer kind of follows the same
direction,
kind of framework, which is that public charging is absolutely necessary, right? I mean, if you want, just like you need gas stations to make a long road trip, you're going to need to stop to put more energy in the car. We need them, right? But I think, again, policymakers and even just, lay people who don't actually drive the cars yet kind of undercount the importance of having that home charging to the EV ownership experience. I mean, if you have charging at home and you get to leave your house every day with a full car, charging actually on a trip becomes kind of an extraordinary thing. You actually don't have to charge as a separate action. You just kind of come home, plug the car in without thinking about it, go off, take care of your business. And until you start driving 300-400 kilometers, you actually don't have to ever visit a charging station. That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
I think we already kind of dived in quite a lot
really
of deep topics. But
already, yeah.
But maybe...
No, I'm sorry, those were either or questions.
Yeah, no,
I
it's good.
I gave you 500 words.
No,
so.
you did a good job. Let's keep it there. But Chris, can you maybe, for the ones who are not super familiar with charging in general, and also maybe not specifically with charging in Germany, can you give us an idea, where are we? What are the challenges that maybe automotive companies, but also people who will drive or who are already driving electric cars, what are the challenges in maybe the day-to-day life?
Well, actually, I think the answer there is almost building upon what we were just talking about, which is that there's a tendency to focus on the really visible stuff. So big, beautiful charging parks on freeway service stations, on city streets, and those are an absolutely necessary piece of the component.
They are.
Right.
Yeah.
They're necessary, but they're not sufficient. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I've got a horse in the race because my company offers a pretty compelling solution for charging at home and at the office. But we did that because we truly believe that that's also a very important part of the puzzle. And it's a whole lot less visible. But for the reasons I just mentioned, it's huge to the ownership experience. Right. So if you force people to go to DC fast charging parks, as an extra task they have to perform once, twice a week, it's like getting gas but slower. People start to not really like the EV ownership experience. But again, if you just, if wherever you work, you live, you shop, you just kind of go there and without thinking about it, you just bang that cable in. It's a small extra step at the end of the day, but then you are actually charging kind of while you accomplish the rest of the tasks in your life. Mm-hmm. And this is actually a big part of the argument we make for equality, is that it's super important to have charging infrastructure even if you don't have a single-family home. Because it's actually it's a huge load on people's time. It actually costs more per kilowatt hour to DC fast charge than it does to charge using AC charging, using your residential electric rates. And so actually not only is it just convenient, it eliminates a disproportionate economic burden on people, and it eliminates a drag on people's time that could be spent for education, spending with family. You can spend that time at home rather than sitting, watching the number go up slowly in your car.
Mm-hmm. Chris, you started HeyCharge, I think, during the pandemic, so that's 4 or 5 years ago. What has changed since then? Because when we go into big cities and there we are in quarters, and then we talk to friends and they say, "Oh, I would like to have an electric car, but there's maybe 2 charging stations in my quarter or whatever." And you are talking now about a world in which it seems we will, every place where you can park a car can actually have, will have connection cable, if you will. Is that the vision? Will we see, like, I just mentioned these numbers. We will have 10 times more chargers in 2030 than we have right now. So will we have them everywhere?
I mean, yes, is that the vision? That is literally our vision statement for HeyCharge, is a charging outlet in front of every car at its overnight parking space. And so that would be transformative to the ownership experience. I mean, we're far away from that yet. I mean, as a country, Germany is actually pretty far along on the electrification, the infrastructure journey. And even Germany does not have a charging station, usually even not even a few in every underground parking garage. And so we're a long ways away from having one at every parking space.
And can you compare it with other countries maybe? So where do we stand in Germany in comparison?
I mean, I'd say Germany benefited quite a bit from the electrification push, that was largely, I think, kicked off by subsidies and just a general desire to kind of make the world better during the pandemic. So across Europe, I think, except for the Nordics, Germany's quite far along. Of course, if you visit Finland, visit Norway, that's just a whole different thing, right?
It's another game.
It's incomparable, right? But of course, I mean, the Nordics have a substantially different set of problems to solve. Obviously in terms of energy, distribution, cost structure, but also urban design and layout. There's just a whole lot less, for example, underground parking.
There is like multi-story buildings where people live, but for example, in the one that I live, we have a big car park outside, and every place where you can park a car, there is an electric charger now, or like at least 80% or something. So that's been solved there. But I guess German cities are. The density of people in German cities is substantially higher than in Norway. Norway is few people with a lot of space. And that's why it's easy to maybe also have more charging infrastructure there than in Germany. When you think about Essen, when you think about Berlin, when you think about Munich, there's a lot of high-story buildings.
And really crowded in the city.
A lot of people.
Yeah. I was in Helsinki for Slush a few months back, and I have this really weird hobby now because.
By the way, Slush is a startup community event, if you will, isn't it?
Yep. So I'd say it's the biggest, one of the best-known startup conferences in Europe. But whenever I'm in a new city, just because of by virtue of what our company does, I have this weird habit of just basically
I could totally see you
I go down. I just walk into parking garages and I'm just like with my phone, I'm like, this one has coverage, this one doesn't. Like, okay, 3 chargers here. How are they connected? Wow, Helsinki blew my mind, and I kind of get it because kind of birthplace of companies like Nokia, right? They have wireless infrastructure everywhere. I was just going around counting 5G sites in underground parking garages and tunnels.
But that's probably
so unusual.
Yeah, but it made you unhappy, isn't it? Because you cannot sell there.
Well, I mean, it actually made me happy because it made me realize how expensive that infrastructure is to deploy. And what we used to think that we were actually competitive with the mobile network companies, right? We say, well, you don't need a mobile network underground. But actually, I mean, our whole technology uses the mobile, the smartphone, which is fundamentally connected to the mobile network. And so we actually think there's a strategic argument for mobile network companies to like us because we actually relieve them from that capital investment of putting these microcells into every last little parking garage.
When we go a little bit more into incentives and policies, I mean, everyone knew the subsidies or the money that you get for an EV car. I think it was till end of 2023 here in Germany. How is it for infrastructure, for charging infrastructure? So what is the current status there? Are there some incentives? Are there subsidies?
There are still some subsidies. We don't find it really driving our business a whole lot. I think you'll find that I have an unusual view on subsidies, which is that, well, basically, as a company, we've focused most of our effort on maximizing value, lowering the cost of deploying and maintaining the infrastructure. And so a funny thing happened actually in the 2020, 2021 years, early days of the pandemic, the subsidies were really flowing for private charging stations. And actually, I'm having trouble remembering. It was something like 800, 900, 1,000 euros you could get for a charging station at your house.
Yep.
And that had a really interesting effect, which was that it made people not care how much charging stations costed. So,
you mean wall boxes?
Exactly, yeah. So basically, we worked tirelessly to lower costs, right? Then actually the consumer was like, don't care. Like, government gave me a lot of money. I'll buy the expensive one. And we kind of said, oh, man, that sucks. And actually our investors were like, why don't you chase the subsidies? And we said, oh, but actually that doesn't feel good because we see an opportunity here to really maximize the value. And so, of course, when the subsidies disappear, you get this really, annoying and a little bit off-putting discontinuity, right? All of a sudden, the subsidy-generated demand crashes. Often there's a rush to kind of cash in right before the subsidy ends. And so, of course, we saw a drop-off in demand as the subsidy ended. But in the long term, actually even the medium term, it did a really great thing, which is that it made consumers value conscious, and that really increased the value of our own technology, which delivered better, a price performance ratio to our customers.
I'm always when I hear these kind of stories of like governments and to have a lot of subsidies for a specific low carbon technology, like a clean tech technology or a clean technology, and then there is this in German you say stop and go policies. Is that how like I understand that you're in the community, you're talking with other operators, with other companies. How was that perceived? Can you tell some stories there? Because I could, on the one hand, could see that, oh yeah, it's great, we have a lot of financial support now, but then when it stops, it's like, okay, the whole market crashes, a lot of business models maybe need to be remodeled, need to be recalculated, need to be whatever. So can you give us an idea about maybe what happened in the community?
I mean, I'll start by saying I'm no economist, right? But I have an opinion, and I think, the heart is in the right place with these subsidies, and probably there's even a good way to do it, but it's exactly the phenomenon you just described, where it's the disruptive effect when usually it's not the arrival of the subsidy, it's the departure, the ending of the subsidy that just basically causes the floor to fall out in the marketplace. And I'm kind of falling back on the example of the subsidy for wall boxes, but you saw a lot of businesses that had almost just built the business around the subsidy. A lot of people went insolvent when that subsidy disappeared because it turns out the whole product had been essentially built, engineered, and priced around the subsidy. And when the subsidy ended, all of a sudden, cost was king, and an entirely different set of companies emerged as the victors.
Yeah, when we think about bottlenecks, when we think about charging stations, I always have this sentence in mind that we got from the CEO of Energie Baden-Württemberg, EnBW, and we interviewed him. I don't know, it was maybe episode 16
years ago.
Or like really early on, and we were like, oh, we got the CEO of EnBW, that's amazing. And he said that from his view, the strongest or the biggest bottleneck when it comes to building EV chargers is companies that can actually dig all the holes, if you will, and then also access to the resources and the cables and all of that. Do you have an idea if these bottlenecks have been solved by now? Is that easier? So is that still a big bottleneck? I know it doesn't really apply for HecCharge because you go down there and you don't really have any tractors or whatever, or Grabmaschine in German. But it's like, what are bottlenecks that you hear also from the community, from maybe competitors?
It may be that I'm just jumping to the bottleneck that was top of mind. It's maybe not exactly what you were asking, but we do indeed have a substantial bottleneck when it comes to just the installers, the people who are licensed to set up chargers, connect to the grid. I mean, basically electricians and their assistants and the master electrician who has to supervise the grid connection. These are all limited resources. I mean, we have a pretty nice real-time view in the market, and it seems like it's gotten a little bit better since last year. I think also the solar industry dropped a little bit, and of course we're competing for people with fundamentally the same skill set. So at the moment we are actually trying to increase our resources because we see a huge increase in our own customer demand this year due to some partnerships we've signed, and it seems like it's, at least in comparison to the last 3-4 years, basically since we've been doing this, it seems like the right time to finally find the people. But I mean, of course, it's a limitation, and it's far from being easy.
Okay, yeah. And this is one challenge, and maybe we can go with that to other challenges or barriers. So, what do you think are the biggest technical challenges, or in general, what are the biggest challenges you face or we face when we think about the charging infrastructure?
Well, actually, I mean, I'd like to be able to say that everything is kind of just green, blue skies, rosy. I don't know what the right metaphor is here, but I mean, the
unicorns for sure.
Yeah, unicorns running across the street.
Easy.
No, I mean, of course there are problems, but I mean, the neat thing is that charging as a technology, the pure, if you excuse, the crude metaphor, like the putting the electrons in the vehicle, this is pretty much solved. I mean, vehicles are substantially more consistently compatible with chargers. And, keep in mind that if you look at HeyCharge's website, it looks like we sell you a charger, and we will, but we're not really charger manufacturers. We make the platform that makes the chargers work and lets you bill for them and, lets you manage them through the app. So, of course, we are sourcing our chargers from third-party companies and putting our name on them, and just saying, hey, this works with our platform. And the neat thing is, it has become substantially lower risk to just take a commodity charger from any manufacturer, and it works, right? You don't really have to worry about, okay, this charger works with car A, but not car B. Car C sometimes works. And there's some pretty infamous stories about certain car makes that, basically didn't work with, 60, 70% of the chargers out there. We are past that, and I'd say, that's just, the industry is kind of converged. Compatibility testing is a thing now. And I think the specifications and how you can successfully implement them and what you can get away with not doing, these things are well understood by the industry. And so we are in a much happier place because, quite literally when we started, there were still cars out there that might not charge on our chargers. And not because our chargers were broken, but because sometimes the cars didn't follow the spec. And so that's, I think, really a nice convergence in the industry for us.
Yeah, and maybe now we can go a little bit to the solution that you provide.
Can I ask one more question before? So I just prepping for this session, I was like, so now we have got 1.6 million electric cars on the roads in Germany, and it's gonna be.
It should be.
It should be.
It's gonna be. I don't know.
How many will we have? I didn't figure that out. But anyway, we're gonna have 1 million public charging points, and we're gonna have several million electric cars. And I just read online that the demand for the electricity just for transport will increase by 630% until 2030. I think that's on a global scale. But anyway, so we will have a lot of more demand. Is there any ways that plays into building out infrastructure in the future? Like the electricity that comes, for example, out of these chargers, is it always going to be clean? Is it not clean? How do you make sure that they are clean? Do drivers care about that? Or are they saying, hey, eventually it's going to be green? Is that any issue? I'm just wondering.
That is a whole lot of questions wrapped up in one.
I'm good at that, asking many questions in one go.
If you could give me a written outline, I'm going to have to work through this one by one. Let's see. So I think, do customers care? That's, of course, there's no universal answer to that, but we do find that in general, customers care. Are they willing to pay a substantial premium? That's not something we've really experimented with, but we are sourcing green electricity for our sites. And here's where actually subsidy and incentive programs maybe are working well. Most of our sites require green electricity for our customers to be able to claim the incentives that they are due. Right, and so they hold us to account, and we need to be able to provide documentation that the electricity we are selling them is sourced from green suppliers. I think the other part of your question was a little bit more about what is the overall impact of this massive increase in consumption on the grid. And this is where we get into buzz phrases like energy transition and smart energy, smart grids. But at the point of consumption, basically our chargers, this is where we have a role to play in basically helping shape consumption, right? And you can do this on a market basis with dynamic tariffs, where the tariffs are typically lower when there's more power available. And the neat thing about EV charging is that it's such a kind of a long-term thing, and it doesn't really impact people if maybe you slow down during the most expensive moments, and then you've got all this consumption you can shift to the off-peak moments. And well, this is not a video thing, so you can't really see how I'm moving my arms, but there's this huge peak during the dinner, right? And then there's this incredible trough, this low area overnight. And actually, EV charging has the capacity to make the grid overall more efficient by essentially filling in those troughs and making the peak and the low closer together. This allows the grid operators to actually have much more predictability, and they have to use far less basically spinning reserves to be able to meet these really huge transient demand peaks. And so there's actually an argument to be made that EVs can stabilize the grid and make the overall grid and production substantially more efficient and cost effective.
And I think that's an important point. Maybe we can say a few words regarding vehicle-to-grid solution. I mean, that was also a topic we wanted to talk about. And I think when we talk about the electricity grid and you say, okay, we can shape it a little bit, vehicle-to-grid could be another option for this. So can you maybe say a little bit what is the current status there and where are we going there?
So what is vehicle-to-grid?
And what is vehicle-to-grid? Maybe the first question, what is vehicle-to-grid? Yeah.
So we start with that. I mean, that's basically where instead of solely being a consumer, a net consumer of power from the grid, the vehicle can actually discharge its battery back into the grid, and that can be something that is managed on a building basis, right? So maybe if electricity is expensive to purchase from the grid at a certain moment, the vehicle can fill the gap, and essentially, you basically have to figure out, well, what price did you buy the electricity that went into that vehicle, and then what is the effective cost of basically cycling that energy in and out of the battery, because the battery is a consumable, limited resource. You've got to be able to turn that into a number. So that's how it does work. The funny thing is that our customers aren't really asking for it right now, because we are typically serving a mix of residential and business, so company, fleet, employee charging in any given building. And the market maker isn't really there to allow us to basically price, that arbitrage in and offer, for example, a discount to a customer maybe for future charging if they give us power now. We don't really have the data to be able to do that, and people aren't really asking for it. And you can just kind of think about the individual ownership experience. Why would I, the vehicle owner, just basically allow the charging operator to effectively take life off of my battery to maybe make my neighbor's electricity cheaper? There's just not really a good reason for that yet. And I'm absolutely convinced that market maker will emerge. I mean, if I had the capacity to do two startups at once, maybe that would be number two. Somebody listening should probably do that, right? But that's something that the market, I think, really needs.
Okay, yeah, that would be my follow-up question. So will there be a market maker in the future? Or
well, that also substantially depends on the type of batteries that we have in the future, isn't it? Like, I feel that there's a lot of fright in society of like, okay, if I make my car available to that, will that have negative implications on maybe my reach of the battery, of the what's the word, Chris, help us?
The range or the degradation.
The degradation of the battery.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a lot of press lately about how battery degradation turns out to be. I mean, this is a little bit it's based on actual large numbers, but I'd still say the conclusion is rather anecdotal. It seems to be better than expected. I'm making air quotes right now. Right?
Yeah.
So it seems that all of the doom and gloom about how quickly your battery might degrade is, for the most part, in the broad sense. I mean, there obviously are outliers, exceptions, people who had a bad time. Seems like it's not as bad as people had feared, but at the same time, I mean, it is by definition a limited resource. So we're just saying, okay, well, the cost maybe of cycling, energy in and out of your battery, maybe it's 50% of whatever it would have been when we thought it was a bigger problem. Yep, hitting the mic, but. It's still a problem. It still has a price, and somebody has to figure out how to compensate folks for that, because I think, in the end, people don't buy a car as a charity. They buy it because it's a financial investment and they want to maximize the return.
Sometimes in Germany, it's also the case for a status symbol, but yeah.
That's fair.
Fair enough. But do you think that if vehicle-to-grid would be supported by government in terms of incentives, or for example, I guess we would still need these smart meters for that, would companies like HeyCharge be able to do that? Is it technological complicated?
When you look at the complexity of the charger itself, I mean, I guess the technical answer is yes, it does add substantial cost to the components that go into the charger. The software becomes substantially more complicated, therefore expensive. But I mean, none of this is intractable. I mentioned early in the podcast that one of our focuses has always been on maximizing value, and that includes essentially building in exactly what people pay for and find value in our product today, right? So folks don't pay for anything they don't want today. So we have not actually invested in the vehicle-to-grid capability in our current generation product. We have it on the roadmap and are expecting to build it into the chargers we launch next year. And that's, I think, I hope that's the right strategy. But the neat thing is, we're hedging our bets because we make it modular, right? So we'll be able to take it in and out of the chargers depending on whether customers want it. But I can tell you, this year, no customers asked for it.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying, like, if there's no incentive by the government, since it's a kind of a new concept, it's not new. I wrote my master thesis in 2012 about it, so it's not new, but it's still like not really. It's on the horizon, but it's not here yet, I suppose. And I guess when you start a company, when you run a startup, it's always the differentiation of like, do we want to be razor sharp and on the things we do now to really get them forward, or do we want to look in this opportunity, that opportunity, this opportunity? That's probably maybe not the strategic right move to do maybe right now, even because it is still far away on the horizon. Would you agree with that? Or
yeah, one of my team famously within our company has the phrase "revenue drives the resources," and I think that's a perfect kind of just encapsulation for like not only that you need to focus, but how you focus. You focus on the things that your customers will pay for in the time frame you can sell the product, and in the time frame during which your outcome is important. For us, we're a startup. We survive on an investment cycle, so we need to get to the next round. And so if we invest in V2G before people will pay for it, that's basically a wasted investment unless they all of a sudden start paying for it before the next round. But our bet is basically on next year being when this really becomes important.
Yep. Can I ask one more question, Marcus?
Yeah, sure.
Since we're still talking a bit about HeyCharge, what's your go-to-market strategy really? Like, how do you find these people that have buildings with parking garages, for example? That's just very technical, but I'm just like, from a business point of view, I'm interested in how you do that. Do you call them all? Do you go to cities? What do you do?
So I mean, we technically have two operating models and therefore two customer types. So I think the one you're asking about is we are an operator supplying ready-to-use charging infrastructure to people who have and operate buildings in Germany. And there, our ideal customer profile is a large real estate asset manager. So I'll toot our own horn here a little bit. Say we actually, for example, signed and announced partnerships with Mayag. And then most recently with Vonovia, who's actually the largest property operator in Germany.
That is a big name, yeah.
Yeah, we announced that last week. We're super excited. They've got 500,000 apartments. We like them because it's a little bit more of a relationship and BD development, exercise to get that relationship going. And then there's a huge portfolio once you have the relationship, you've proven yourself, they trust you, they like you, they see the value in our product, they see how we differentiate from the competition. So that's been our most successful scale strategy. There is, of course, a word-of-mouth element. So we do service, for example, WEGs, I guess we'd say in English, homeowners associations.
Yep.
And there, it's a little bit more word-of-mouth. That's almost by definition not really a scalable portfolio relationship. That's kind of one by one by one by one, but we'll do it. And I think we are, as a startup, just learning how to scale our sales process, right? So we don't have a room full of salespeople cold calling yet, but as the market grows, as our need to kind of fill the funnel increases, we may someday start doing that.
Okay, regarding these WEGs, WEG Wohnungseigentümergemeinschaften, I mean, why is it necessary to have such a solution there? Because in my understanding, there would be a parking garage with, I don't know, single spaces, and one space is for one person or for one family. So why do you need this special solution and not, this is my place, this is my wall box or my charging spot there?
That's a really great question. And to be perfectly frank, sometimes they don't need us. The question is it easy, is it practical to basically run a wire from each parking space to the meter associated with the apartment that owns that parking space? And to what extent do people want to be able to, for example, sub-rent the parking space out? Maybe somebody buys an apartment with two parking spaces, they have one car, they have no car, they want to sub-rent it. Our technology, our product makes it really easy for the master, the owner, to basically delegate access to the tenant. The tenant inputs their own credit card, they're off to the races, they pay for their own charging. it really depends on, just a combination of how people want to use the building, who's living in the building, and how easy is it to wire it. I mean, we have a kind of a phrase we use, which is, it sometimes can turn into spaghetti wiring. If you need to wire 100 different parking spaces to 100 different meters, that gets to be problematic. And so we never want to sell something that people don't need. If they legitimately don't need it, then then we basically say, hey, you should probably just go buy some not so smart chargers and just wire them to your meter.
How long does that take though? Like if you're an operator of a mall, or if you as Max just said, Wohneigentümergemeinschaft, with like, I don't know, 8 apartments or 10 apartments. If I would call Chris now, hey Chris, we got this thing here, there's more and more cars, all electric. When can we have this thing in our garage here? Like how does the process look like, and how long does it take?
That is a great question, because that's actually usually not the process. We'd be so happy if that was the process, but actually there is the, I'm forgetting the name of this in German and in English, but basically the annual meeting of all the owners of the building. And typically a project like this...
Jahresversammlung?
Exactly. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. That rings a bell. Yeah. Typically the approval process for a project like this, we'll supply a quote. They'll often get quotes from multiple suppliers. That it needs to go to that meeting, and during that meeting they will choose a supplier and approve the expenditure, because of course there's a capital improvement kind of cost that is shared across the whole homeowners association for the kind of the building, the general infrastructure that goes into the building. So if only it was as easy as just them saying, hey, a couple of us want chargers, can we have it now? Actually, as HeyCharge, that's what we specialize in, is moving fast and getting those chargers in right away. We're working on what we call I hope I'm not breaking a trademark here, we're working on what we call the Hello Fresh approach, where we actually have a ready-to-go toolkit of installation components, and we can basically say, okay, you need items A, B, maybe 3 of C, and a few Ds. You're good to go. Here's the quote. It took us 5 minutes to make, and if you want it, it's in the warehouse. And so we're really ready to service people who have the immediate demand. WEGs are usually not the fastest. So we have quite a few in the portfolio, but they have been quite slow.
It took some time.
Compare that to our asset manager customers, who basically throw us a few buildings a month, and we can install them often within weeks.
That's good.
Yeah, that's good, yeah.
What is it like when we specifically look at the infrastructure that is then being installed? Like, how fast are these chargers that you offer? Is that like, or can the owners decide we want to have 11 or 16 or 300 kilowatts? So how does that look?
We like to make our customers happy, right? So if a customer says we want 300 kilowatts, we'll try to find a way to do that.
I think there's like just for people who are not so aware, there's like a couple of cars in the world who can do that right now. Porsche Taycan does it, and then one other, isn't it? So that's really high.
Yep. My EV is getting a little bit old and what do we say, long in the tooth. So it's I charge at a maximum of 100.
Even 150 is
actually.
And you don't like since your car is going to be in the garage for 10, 11 hours,
exactly,
you don't need any
That's kind of the point that the question often misses, which is that if we're talking about home charging, at work charging, your dwell times are super long, and then also there's not a lot of power capacity in the building. So basically you'd be talking about an incredibly expensive charger on a per unit basis. That then, if you want to have one at every parking space, well, it's immediately unaffordable. And then the irony is that because of the power limitations to the building, you would be basically managing the load down on each charger. Everyone comes home at 5, 6 p.m., plugs in. Probably everyone's going to get like 11, 12, 20 kilowatts anyway because of the power limits in the building. So you're absolutely right. That's really not the right choice for a residential building or a commercial building where you're there for 8, 12.
But in a mall, it would make sense potentially.
It's actually funny. So Tesla has been doing a lot of supercharger installations in parking malls, and because Tesla typically delivers 100 to maybe 250 kilowatts in their chargers, I would actually argue that's also actually a little too fast for the mall. Your typical charging time is about between 20, 30. If you've got an older car like me, maybe up to 60 minutes. But that actually really stresses you out because you've got to go into the mall and complete your tasks in those 30, 40, 50, 60 minutes. And Tesla will charge you €1 per minute if you stay on the charger after it's done.
So you have to run out.
Right. So it actually puts a lot of pressure on you to finish. So I've heard a new phrase. I mean, we don't have a horse in this race. We don't really make DC fast chargers, but there's a new class of charger in the 20 to 50 kilowatt range, which I've heard called opportunistic charging. And that, as a user, if I saw a 50 kilowatt charger at a shopping mall, I'd be like, that's perfect, right? Because if I roll in at 20%, I can plug into that thing and still have an hour or two to shop without worrying that I'm going to be blocking the charger. So I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. But isn't that currently also, I think in Germany there are these blocking things even for the 12 or 20 kilowatt chargers.
What do you mean blocking things?
Yeah, after 3 hours you have to pay for it.
Yeah,
additionally.
So the standard is usually 4 hours, and then it's about 10 cents per minute up to a maximum.
Yeah.
And this is largely a consequence of the tariff structure that the roaming broker who connects each charging operator to the issuer of the cards you pay with. There's actually not a really good way for them to charge kind of by definition when you finish charging. Yeah. So they just have to basically say, okay, well,
after
if you charge more than 4 hours.
Yeah.
And the irony is if I'm on a street side charger in Munich that's delivering my car 11 or 16 kilowatts, actually 4 hours, if I come in empty, is literally not enough to finish it. So I'm paying a blocking fee while my car is still charging.
Still charging,
right?
yeah.
Or, for example, if you want to park overnight on a charger, which is, technically you're probably blocking it by 3, 4 a.m., but it's also just kind of a nice thing to charge overnight. Yeah. Again, you end up paying a blocking fee.
And no one is going to come in at 3 or 4 o'clock and say, now I would like to charge. At least the likelihood is not very high.
So slowly, we're going to the end of the episode. And I think one last question maybe from my side. How do you think will the future look like regarding the infrastructure, electric charging and everything? So what is your vision for the future, for 2030 maybe?
Well, I think we started early in the episode with the overall company vision, which is just massively available, ubiquitous, reliable, affordable charging, right? And I think if we get there in any form, we've already won a big part of the battle. But then the question is, how will the charging experience change and improve over the years? This is a hard one, and I have a hard time making a bet on this, but we're bullish on it from a user experience perspective, is wireless charging. And again, it fits our technology and our worldview very well because we've basically eliminated the physical contact of payment and authentication from the charging process. So a wireless charging experience where you also eliminate the physical process of plugging in the vehicle. Just imagine, essentially driving into the charging pad and walking into the house. Well, that's already the experience the folks behind wireless charging pitch for single-family homes. With our authentication and payment layer, you could actually have that at your parking spot in a multifamily building, and that's just kind of an amazing combination of user experiences. And so the other piece of HeyCharge's basically mission that we didn't talk about is essentially to make charging incredibly frictionless, just a great user experience. And so this is super well aligned with where we want to go there.
Yeah, and I think that is something. Tesla is doing quite well, this charging experience. Yep. I think a lot of people say to me, say that only plug in and don't have to, press buttons or do anything there at a terminal. Just plug in, plug out, and then you're done. So
they are a great example of why vertical integration works, right? And they got to the plug and charge experience that everyone else is trying to build and deploy now. They got to that so many years ago, right? And they did it because they controlled both sides.
You're just checking something, but I think we have to come to an end.
We have to come to it. No, I just wanted to check. It's is it com or is it de? Because so obviously it's my opportunity now to kind of abmoderieren, we say in German. What do we say in English? Well,
so the last words.
To wrap it up.
Yeah. So thanks for joining us here in the podcast. The CEO of HeyCharge, Chris Cardé, and the HeyCharge is available at HecCharge.com, I understand. So people, if you're interested, check it out. And we're also going to put it into the show notes. So Chris, thanks a lot for joining us here today and spending this time with us.
Oh, thank you so much for the invitation. I very much enjoyed it. And thank you for the beer.